Hi friends, this is Dr. Sage Breslin and this is Wisdom Wednesdays, my special series on my journey with cancer. I think this is video 17. Wow, it's hard to believe that it's been that long that I have been putting this information out there for all to consume. As a private person, that's almost feels unconscionable, but I'm glad that I have developed such a beautiful tribe and have allowed you into my personal space as I move through this journey now in the last few weeks before the whole transplant process. So two things I want to talk about. They're probably very much interrelated. And, you know, one of the things I've been considering is, what it is that we as leaders and entrepreneurs and just even private people put out there for the world to see. And I've talked a lot, both in my publications, my books, publicly, and even this series about what it means to be more authentic, to be more transparent, to not only show the mask to the folks that are in our midst, but to show more of the inner workings and our feelings and our thoughts and even our implicit biases. And so I think how this came up for me more recently is that very few people know that my mom is dying of cancer. And it's been a process, and it's been a lengthy process, and it has been really hard. My mom is one of my biggest fans, and she is one of my favorite people. And this process hasn't been graceful for her. It hasn't been consistent with the human that she's always been. She's a fighter, and sometimes that's a struggle. I mean, I know that, intimately, when we're fighters, we want to show up in a certain way. We want to fight, and surrendering, letting go, allowing others to help us when we want to do it ourselves. That is, that feels so agonizing, I think. And so to be in this process for myself and, also with my children, and to be trying to hold space for this stage of her end of life has been hard. I mean, I think it would be for anyone. But I think that because of my own process, I've just kind of, held it in this space where I try to get up to see her as often as I can, which unfortunately with reactions to the chemo and other medications has been, not as often as I wanted. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to watch somebody die. It's a challenge to watch the body go away step by step. And this is not my first rodeo. I've lost others. I do this as part of my living. It's the, probably very few people in my professional sphere know that I help people transition. But it's different. It's different when it's your own family members. And so what I noticed, I came back the other day, and it had been a hard day. And I think for me, it was the day after all my chemo meds had been delivered, and I just hit a wall. And I think my children are used to seeing me manage everything. And my hands were shaking from the dexamethasone, and I was trying to put dinner on the table, and I dropped my dinner, not their dinner, my dinner on the floor. And of course, one of the kids hadn't swept up the floor, so it's not like I was going to eat the dog hair inclad piece of salmon. And I lost it. I just lost it. And I guess I'm getting a little better at being more transparent with them, but it was in such a way I think it scared them. And they didn't like it, and they wanted me to sort of pipe down, and that made it all the worse. And I ended up just, you know, leaving the kitchen and leaving them to have their own dinner. And by the time I got into my room with the door closed, I completely fell apart. I mean, so much so that I couldn't stand up. And I sat there in my bathroom on my knees, sobbing into a towel and realizing, it's not just what's happening to me physically. It's not just, certainly wasn't about the dinner, for God's sakes. I mean, I could always make something else. It was the feeling of being out of control. It was not being in control of how the medication affects me, and knowing, look, I'm beholden to this medication because it's doing what it needs to do for me to prepare for the transplant. But it's hard not to be able to hold on to something, or to break plates or glasses or dishes because your hands are shaking so much. And it wasn't just that, and it wasn't the dinner, and it wasn't even my own thoughts about, what is rapidly approaching. I think that part of it was just the reality of where my mother is in this cycle and what that means for me, and my desire to be both more involved and less involved because of the state of her health. And that's hard to say. I mean, every single moment I have with my mom is dear to me. And yet to see her like this is really hard. I know that at one point, as my grandmother was dying of Lewy bodies, there was a point at which I knew that she just wasn't there anymore. And I didn't want to see her like that. I wanted to protect and preserve my memories of who she had been in my life. And I notice a lot of these same feelings coming up now. And I also have, I don't think it's a fear. I think it's an anxiety, maybe, that these things will double up on one another, that I'll be in the hospital, not able to drive myself, not be able to be exposed to anyone else and their illnesses and so on and so forth, and to know that she is at her end of life. It feels like an unmanageable piece of this process. And in many ways, like, the only thing I have is to recognize that God's got this, and it doesn't matter whether I'm there or not there, and I have to let it go. I have to surrender it, because there's nothing I can do about it. And that's, again, so many of you have watched these videos, like, I really like control. So one more time where it is, in my face that I'm not in control of this process. I can be in control of little tiny things like making and posting these videos, but at the end of the day, there's so much I'm not in control of. So that has been coming up for me, and the kids are having to accept that I'm not in control, and that the person that they normally see and experience is not quite as available to them, and that's their journey, and I have to let them be on that journey. So the other piece of this, kind of the showing up piece, is that I met with a client the other day, and I had a very unfortunate reaction to the medications a couple of weeks ago. And this was like, 4 days later, the reaction was at its worst. And I went to meet with him, and he asked after my health and said, how are you? And I said, oh, I'm having a bit of a go today. And his response was, well, you don't look well. And I remember saying, oh, thank you, or something like that. That probably didn't even make sense. And we went on with the session, and I found myself thinking about it for days afterwards, not in in a personal way. I didn't take it personally, but I wondered what he meant. And so finally, when I met with him, the following week, I asked him, what did you mean? You know, in what way did I not look well? And he was kind enough to share with me that, um, it was my energy, that my energy was not as positive and as forward as it normally is. And I mean, probably the woman in me was like, oh, thank you, God, check the box. Like, it wasn't that my makeup wasn't right, or the dress was the wrong color, or, which is so ridiculous. But I still think about these things, right? Um, but that energetically, that he could see that I was wonky. And I was terribly uncomfortable in my skin, and there's nothing wrong with my brain or my desire to meet with him. But energetically and physically, honestly, I wasn't feeling good. And he could see that because he's a very empathic, intuitive guy. So, two things came through for me. One was that it's not just when I'm feeling physically like too tired to meet with someone. That's very easy for me to say, I've got to reschedule. But that I have to attend to, how I'm feeling energetically and emotionally as well. Those things are, as important to us as we meet with our colleagues and our clients, our friends, family, team. Those are equally as important. And so I really started thinking about, how I'm showing up, and that it is important for me to kind of check in with myself before moving forward, before engaging with others, just to really see, does this work for me? Is this right for me? And many of like, I feel pretty good. I am so blessed that I've had as few problems with this chemotherapy protocol as I have. And I don't want to jinx it. I want to say, oh, thank God. And I'm hoping beyond hope, honestly, that the next protocol will also be one that I can have some grace with. And, perhaps my body will be able to, tolerate it as well as I can. Um, all that being said, we need to look at ourselves as leaders and as entrepreneurs, and to really understand that, how we show up energetically can be perceived by others. They don't have to be psychic to know that our energy is off, or that we're withholding, or that we're frazzled or frenetic, or just not feeling like ourselves. Like, it's really important to evaluate how you're showing up for others, for your team, for your family, and to really study that, because it makes a difference. Even if we think like, oh, I'm all put together, like I've got the right suit on, I've got the right jewelry, like that has nothing to do with whether our energy is like flying around the room, or we're worried or distressed about somebody else and what they're going through. We need to know that getting below the surface and cleaning up things as much as possible is where we begin. So that when we're holding space, so that when we're engaging with others, we're able to harness that energy, we're able to make that eye contact, we're able to direct our energy directly towards them. And that affects our connection, which affects our communication, which affects how we do what we do. So maybe give some consideration, not only to me and how I'm doing this week, but how you're showing up with others, and what the energy is like that you're showing up with. So this is Dr. Sage Breslin. This is Wisdom Wednesdays. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate your being part of this journey with me, being part of my tribe, and for being so gracious and generous with your time, with your well wishes, with your donations to the GoFundMe campaign. I just want to say thank you so much, and I look forward to our next journey.